Caleb hooked his fingers into the narrow edge and pulled gently, the board lifting with a soft creak. Beneath it, darkness waited. Reaching down carefully, his fingers brushed against something solid, a small, weathered metal box. Inside lay a folded envelope and a photograph of a younger man beside a dog strikingly like Shadow. He slid a finger beneath the seal. The handwriting was steady, reading, "If you are reading this, then you have found what was meant to be found.
Don't touch him.
If this night feels like it belongs to no one, then it belongs to you." In that stillness, Caleb realized the night had just been waiting for him. Some birthdays don't arrive with candles or voices, just the quiet proof that you're still here. The night air carried a thin bite of early winter as Caleb Hayes sat alone at a small wooden table outside a roadside diner, the kind of place most people passed without noticing. A flickering neon sign hummed above him, casting a pale red glow over the chipped surface where his meal rested, one modest plate, a paper cup of coffee, and a single cupcake he'd bought with the last few crumpled dollars in his jacket pocket. Across from him, Shadow sat alert, yet calm, his thick German shepherd coat catching the light like brushed silver, amber eyes fixed, not on the food, but on Caleb himself. Caleb exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together for warmth, his breath turning to mist in the cold. 40 years old, yet tonight he felt older, worn down by miles that had no destination, and memories that refused to fade. He glanced at the small plastic candle pressed into the cupcake, its wick bending in the restless wind, refusing to hold a flame.
Step back.
"Guess it's just us again, buddy," he murmured, his voice low, almost swallowed by the distant sound of passing trucks on the highway. Shadow's ears twitched at the tone more than the words, as if he understood something deeper than language. The diner behind them buzzed faintly with life, laughter, clinking plates, the soft murmur of conversations that belonged to other people's worlds. Caleb picked up the cupcake, broke it cleanly in half, and placed one piece gently on a napkin in front of Shadow. The dog didn't move right away. He simply watched, steady and knowing, as if waiting for something Caleb hadn't noticed yet. A cold breeze slipped beneath the table, brushing against Caleb's boots, and for a brief second, he closed his eyes, letting the silence settle around him like an old, familiar coat. Somewhere in that quiet, something shifted, too subtle to see, but just enough for Shadow to lift his head, and listen. Shadow's ears sharpened, tilting slightly toward the wooden floor beneath the table, his body going still in that quiet, focused way Caleb had learned to trust more than any warning sign. Caleb opened his eyes, noticing the shift immediately, the subtle tension in the dog's posture that never came without reason.
Step back.
"What is it, boy?" he asked softly, leaning forward as the faint hum of the neon sign buzzed above them like a tired heartbeat.
You're a good boy, aren't you?
Shadow did not bark. He did not move toward the food.
Soft dog
Instead,
panting?
he lowered his head and let out a low, almost questioning breath, then gently pressed one paw against the worn plank beneath Caleb's boots. Caleb frowned, glancing down at the floor, seeing nothing but old wood, scratched and faded by years of use. The wind slipped through again, colder this time, carrying with it a faint scent of dust and something older, like forgotten spaces that had not been opened in years. He shifted his foot slightly, and that was when he felt it, a hollow give beneath the sole of his boot, subtle but real. His brow tightened as he tapped the plank with his heel, listening past the diner noise, past the passing cars, focusing on that small, uneven echo.
I'm not going anywhere.
Shadow watched him closely now, tail low, eyes steady, as if waiting for Caleb to catch up to something already understood. Slowly, Caleb crouched down, running his fingers along the edge of the board, feeling a thin gap where wood met wood. "Well, I will be," he murmured under his breath, more to himself than to the dog. The cupcake sat forgotten on the table, the candle still unlit, while the night seemed to draw closer around them, quieter somehow, as if holding its breath.
You're a good boy, aren't you?
Caleb hooked his fingers into the narrow edge and pulled gently, the board lifting with a soft creak. That sounded louder than it should have in the stillness. Beneath it, darkness waited, and something else, something hidden just out of sight, as though the ground itself had been keeping a secret meant for this exact moment. Caleb held the plank in place for a moment, as if the simple act of opening it had shifted something deeper than wood, then slowly set it aside, revealing a narrow cavity beneath the diner floor where shadows gathered thick and still. The air that rose from below carried a faint chill, different from the wind, older somehow, like a room that had waited too long to be remembered. Shadow stepped closer without hesitation, lowering his head and sniffing once, then sitting back with a quiet certainty that told Caleb this was no accident. Reaching down carefully, Caleb felt along the hidden space until his fingers brushed against something solid, cool to the touch. He paused, his breath catching just slightly, then drew it out into the dim light. It was a small metal box, weathered at the edges, its surface dulled by time but intact, as though it had been protected from everything above. For a long second, he simply stared at it, the hum of the neon sign fading into the background, the world narrowing to this single, unexpected weight in his hands. "You found something, did you not?" he murmured, glancing at Shadow, whose tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. Caleb ran his thumb across the lid, noticing faint scratches that looked less like damage and more like marks left by careful hands. The diner door creaked behind him as someone entered, laughter spilling briefly into the night, but it felt distant, unconnected to whatever this moment was becoming. He lifted the lid gently, the hinge giving a soft, tired sound, and inside lay a folded envelope and a photograph, both untouched by the years that had hidden them away. The photograph caught the light first, edges slightly curled, showing a younger man in a familiar uniform, standing beside a dog that looked strikingly like Shadow, their silhouettes framed by sunlight. Caleb's chest tightened as he leaned closer, something unspoken rising quietly within him, as if the past had reached forward, waiting for him to notice it at last. Caleb held the photograph closer to the dim neon glow, his eyes tracing the outline of the man's face, the set of his shoulders, the quiet steadiness in his posture that felt strangely familiar, as if he were looking at someone he should remember but could not quite place.
Don't touch him.
The dog beside that man stood tall and alert, its stance almost identical to Shadow's, ears forward, gaze fixed on something beyond the frame, as though both animals shared the same unseen awareness. A faint warmth stirred in Caleb's chest, not quite comfort, but something close to recognition, something that pressed gently against the edges of memory without forcing its way in. He turned the photograph over slowly, his fingers careful, almost respectful, and there, written in faded ink, were a few simple words, slightly worn but still clear enough to read in the trembling light, "For the one who finds this when it matters." Caleb exhaled quietly, the breath leaving him slower than he expected, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Behind him, the diner's door opened again, a brief gust of warmth and laughter spilling outward before fading just as quickly, leaving him alone once more in the soft hum of night. Shadow shifted closer, pressing gently against Caleb's leg, his presence steady, grounding, as though reminding him he was not truly alone. Caleb set the photograph carefully on the table, next to the untouched cupcake, and reached for the envelope beneath it, his fingers pausing just above the worn paper.
Step back.
For a moment, he did nothing, listening instead to the quiet rhythm around him, the distant road, the faint rattle of the sign, the subtle breath of the world continuing without asking anything of him. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he slid a finger beneath the seal and began to open it, unaware that whatever waited inside had already begun to change the weight of this night in ways he could not yet understand. The paper inside the envelope unfolded with a soft resistance, as though it had been waiting years for this exact moment, and Caleb held it carefully, the edges trembling just slightly between his fingers as the neon light flickered overhead. The handwriting was steady but worn, each letter pressed with intention, as if the person who wrote it understood that someday, someone would need these words more than they realized. Caleb leaned in, his eyes scanning the first line, and the world around him seemed to quiet even further, the distant hum of traffic fading into something almost distant and unreal. "If you are reading this," it began, "then you have found what was meant to be found." Caleb swallowed, the words settling into him in a way he could not explain, like a voice speaking softly across time. Shadow remained still beside him, his presence calm but attentive, as if he too understood the weight carried in those lines. The letter spoke of a man who had once sat in the same place, on a night not so different from this one, with nothing but a loyal dog and a heart that had forgotten how to hope. It spoke of quiet choices, of staying when it would have been easier to
Soft
leave,
dog
of
panting.
believing that even the smallest acts of kindness could echo longer than a lifetime. Caleb's grip tightened slightly, his thumb brushing against the paper as he read on, each sentence unfolding like a path he had not known he was walking. Then his breath caught at a single line written near the center of the page, simple and unadorned: "If this night feels like it belongs to no one, then it belongs to you." Caleb lowered the letter just enough to stare at the words, the meaning settling slowly, deeply, like warmth spreading through cold hands. Behind him, the diner's soft glow continued, unchanged, but something inside him had shifted, quiet and undeniable, as if the night itself had decided he was no longer invisible.
I'm not going anywhere.
Caleb read the letter again, slower this time, letting each word settle into the quiet
again.
spaces he had carried for too long, spaces that had once been filled with purpose but had since grown hollow and still. The paper felt warmer now in his hands, as if it held more than ink, as if it carried the weight of someone else's understanding reaching across years to meet him exactly where he sat. He lowered
Step
it carefully onto the table beside the photograph, his
Take it
gaze
easy.
lingering on the image of the
Don't
man and
touch
his
him.
dog, the way they
You're a
stood
good
together
boy, aren't
not
you?
in triumph, but in quiet certainty. Shadow shifted closer, resting
Soft
his
dog
head gently
panting.
against Caleb's knee, a steady pressure that grounded him in the present, reminding him that not everything had been lost. The candle on the cupcake flickered again as the wind softened, its small flame finally catching for a brief, fragile moment before wavering, but not going out. Caleb noticed it then, the tiny glow holding against the cold, and something in his chest loosened just enough for him to breathe deeper than he had in a long time. He leaned back slightly in the worn chair, eyes drifting toward the open diner door where warm light spilled across the pavement, blurring the line between inside and out, between belonging and standing apart. For the first time that night, he
need
did
to
not
leave.
feel like he was
I'm
sitting
not
on the
going
outside
anywhere.
of something he could never reach. Instead, he felt as though he had been
I won't
quietly
ask again.
invited, not by a voice or a gesture, but by the simple act of being seen, even if that recognition had come from someone he would never meet. He reached down and gave Shadow a slow, grateful pat along the neck, his hand lingering there as the world continued its gentle hum around them.
Step
And
back.
in that stillness, Caleb realized that maybe the
Take it
night had
easy.
not been empty after all, maybe it had
Don't
just been
touch him.
waiting for him to notice
You're
what
a
had been
good
there
boy,
all
aren't you?
along. Caleb sat quietly for a long moment, his fingers resting near the
Soft
edge of the
dog
letter as if
panting.
he needed to keep touching it to be sure it was real, that the words had not simply appeared from a tired mind searching for meaning where there was none. The neon light above flickered once more, softer now, casting a steady glow instead of the harsh pulse it had held earlier, and the night seemed to settle into a gentler rhythm around him. Inside the diner, a bell chimed faintly as someone stepped through the door, followed by the low murmur of a waitress greeting them, her voice warm and unhurried, the kind of tone that made a place feel lived in rather than passed through. Caleb glanced up briefly, then back down at the table, where the photograph and letter lay side by side, no longer hidden,
You need
no
to
longer
leave.
forgotten.
I'm not going anywhere.
Shadow shifted again, this time lifting his head and looking toward the diner entrance,
I won't ask
his ears
again.
alert but relaxed, as though whatever he had sensed earlier had not been a warning, but an invitation. Caleb followed his gaze, noticing the way the open door allowed a strip of light to stretch across the pavement, reaching just to the edge of where his boots rested. It was such a small thing, barely
Step back.
noticeable, yet it felt deliberate, like a quiet
Take it
bridge
easy.
between two worlds he had kept separate for
Don't
far
touch
too
him.
long.
You're a good
He leaned
boy, aren't
forward,
you?
picking up the second half of the cupcake and holding it for a moment before taking a slow bite,
Soft
the
dog
sweetness
panting.
unfamiliar, almost surprising against the bitterness he had grown used to. Shadow accepted his portion with a gentle patience, his tail giving a soft, steady sway. And as Caleb chewed, watching the light, listening to the ordinary sounds of people simply being together, he felt something shift again, not sudden or overwhelming, but steady, like a door easing open without a sound, offering him the chance to step through whenever he was ready. Caleb brushed the crumbs from his fingers and looked once more at the open diner door, the light still stretching quietly toward him as if it had no intention of fading. The letter lay beside his hand, its presence no longer strange, but
You need to
steady,
leave.
like something
I'm
that
not
had
going
always
anywhere.
been meant to find him, even if he had taken the long way around to reach it. He
I won't
picked it
ask
up again,
again.
not to reread every word, but to hold on to the feeling it had stirred, that quiet reminder that somewhere, someone had believed a moment like this could matter. Shadow rose slowly to his feet, his posture calm but attentive, and gave a gentle nudge against Caleb's arm, not urgent, not
Step
insistent,
back.
just enough to shift his focus forward.
Take it easy.
Caleb followed the motion, his gaze
Don't
settling
touch
on
him.
the doorway once
You're
more,
a good
where a
boy,
waitress
aren't ya?
now stood for a brief second, holding the door open for an elderly couple stepping inside.
Soft dog panting.
She smiled at them, a small, natural gesture, then turned slightly, her eyes passing over Caleb without hesitation or surprise, as if he had always been part of the scene. There was no judgment in that glance, no question, just a quiet acknowledgement that lingered for a fraction of a second longer than expected. Caleb felt it, subtle but real, like a thread connecting him back to something he had not realized he missed. He stood slowly, the chair scraping lightly against the pavement, and reached for the photograph, slipping it carefully into his jacket pocket along with the letter. The night air still held its chill, but it no longer pressed against him the same way.
You need to leave.
Shadow
I'm not going
stepped
anywhere.
beside him, steady as ever, and together they moved a few steps closer to the door,
I won't ask
stopping
again.
just at the edge where shadow met light. Caleb paused there, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, recognizing that sometimes the hardest part was not finding the door, but choosing to step through it. Caleb stood at the edge of the doorway, the soft warmth from inside brushing against his face while the
back.
cool night lingered at his back, and for a moment he allowed
it
himself to feel both at once, the past and the
Don't touch
possibility
him.
of something new meeting
You're a good
quietly in
boy,
that
aren't
narrow
you?
space. Shadow stepped forward first, not pulling, not rushing,
Soft dog
simply moving
panting.
with a calm certainty that made the choice feel less like a decision and more like a natural next step. Caleb followed, his boots crossing from the dim pavement into the gentle light of the diner, the faint hum of conversation wrapping around him in a way that no longer felt distant. The bell above the door chimed softly as it closed behind them, a small, clear sound that seemed to mark the moment without drawing attention to it. The waitress glanced up again, offering a simple nod and a quiet smile that carried no expectation, only welcome, and Caleb returned it with the smallest lift of his chin, a gesture he had not realized he still knew how to make. He chose a seat near the window, not hidden, not fully in
You
the
need to
center,
leave.
but somewhere
I'm
in
not going
between,
anywhere.
where he could see both the road outside and the reflection of light within.
I won't
Shadow
ask again.
settled beside him, calm and steady, his presence unchanged, yet somehow brighter in this space. Caleb reached into his jacket, feeling the outline of the photograph and the letter, reminders that even forgotten places could hold something meant to be found. He did not need to read
Step
them
back.
again. Their meaning had already taken
Take it
root.
easy.
The waitress approached,
Don't
setting
touch
down
him.
a fresh cup of
You're
coffee
a good
without a
boy,
word,
aren't ya?
the steam rising gently into the air, and Caleb wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth
Soft
settle